Hey, all you creative cellists, welcome to the shed. And today we're going to be working on a mini practice routine for all of you faux bass players out there. And quick disclaimer here, guys, even though I've always been way more interested in the bow, to me that's kind of the sound and point of playing the cello. If you're doing any type of non-classical cello playing these days with any type of ensemble, you're invariably going to be stuck with bass playing duty at least some or most of the time. So even if you don't think that you need to improve and hone these skills, this video probably might be worth your time. A few years ago, I was asked to write an etude for Mike Bloch's Contemporary Cello series, and I contributed a piece called The Rake that dealt with a lot of these same techniques that I think are really at the core of giving your cello playing more of a bass type feel. They're also really fun, easy to learn, and a great way to work on your overall time and rhythmic feel. The two techniques we're going to focus on today are raking in the right hand and slurring in the left. And while these are relatively simple and easy to get the basics of, I wanted to make this video because much like working on patterns with the bow, a lot of these can be pretty overwhelming in terms of all of the different possibilities, especially when you take into account the musical context and things the other hand might be doing. And so it can be really difficult to organize our practice and to just break down our work so that we're isolating one technique at a time and really improving in a linear and predictable way. So today I want to take you through a quick practice routine, and I've created a worksheet for this that you can follow along with. And in typical IGC fashion, we're not just going to be practicing together, but I'm going to be trying to break down some of the tactics and strategies that I use to create this routine along the way so that you can apply this to any piece of music that you're working on. In this case, I've chosen an incredibly simple bass line. It's actually something that I need to practice. It's a bass line written by the sax player in my quartet. It's really simple and easy to learn, which is a great place to start, right? We want to be focusing on learning these new techniques, not learning new notes. So let's try this together. It's at the top of your page. It's a 16-bar pattern with each chord repeating twice, like this. And then repeat. Next chord. Again. And. 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 Very good. Before we start adding the techniques that we're going to focus on today, I want to already plant a flag in your brain about the central focus of this lesson and really everything you should be working on in your practice, which is groove. And there's two specific things we're going to be aware of here. First of all, we're always going to be working with some type of drum track. And for this groove, we're going to be going for like a Latin feel. So I've found a cool bayon feel in my Drum Genius app, which I love using. Drum Genius doesn't give me any money. I just think it's probably one of the best drum apps. This is so much better than a metronome because the whole idea of developing your time and feel and groove to me is about getting your subdivisions happening. In other words, we should always be not thinking about, but feeling and hearing at least the basic level of subdivision in our playing. So for something like this, that would be the eighth note. Chukka, 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 right? That needs to kind of be ingrained in our soul. And playing along with a good drummer or good recording of a drummer that has that feel locked in is really, it cannot be understated how important it is. Right? And you'll notice that every time before we start each example, I not only have that drum track on, but because I'm trying to really sync my body to it instead of sort of tune it out, which we do sometimes with those boring metronome clicks, I'm going to start moving my body along with it, almost imagining that it's like the greatest groove I've ever heard in my life. You know how when you start to hear one of your favorite songs, you start moving? and I'm going to resync my entire body in terms of my movement with that track before I even start playing. The other thing I want you to do is to be aware of your technique and your connection to the string as you play these grooves. So if you take your string and imagine you're about to play a note on your C string, but don't. Just hold it and maybe even pull it to the side as you would. Again, we're not releasing the string. I like to keep my thumb here on the side of the fingerboard most of the time. And notice that give in the string. It's going to be a little bit different wherever you are. And that'll change the color of the sound, just like it does for the bow. But what I want you to focus on is the fact that there's no sound yet. Right? There's no sound until we actually release the string back in the other direction. It's that releasing of the string that we should be aware of, because that's the actual top of the beat. This is important because as we start to play more intricate patterns here and more notes, it's easy to lose that awareness of the release of each string, right? Sure, we can still feel the strings and we're thinking about the notes more in our left hand, but again, if you think of that release of the string as where the beat is, and that you're releasing strings on the beat, not just touching the string or pulling the string or stroking the string, that's going to really help to focus the consistency of your attack and keep your groove locked in. Okay. That was a lot of prep work, but I think it's critically important. And because we don't do a lot of these videos that focus on faux bass playing, I really wanted to kind of set that up for you. Okay, now let's try actually running through one more time just our basic grooves so you can get the feel of the track. And ideally, you can kind of memorize this, again, so you're not focused on the notes. Okay, let's try it together. Again, we'll start getting our bodies in the groove, dancing to it, however feels natural to you. It might just be a moving of the foot, a bobbing of the head, doesn't really matter, as long as your body is dancing to the rhythm before you even start playing, right? This is Grooving Musician 101. Okay, now focusing on the release of the strings. Second bar. Third bar. And. Just working on that is well worth your time, okay? Repeating that until you feel great about it, your groove specifically. Okay, now let's dive into the lesson. We've chosen our bass line, we've got the hang of it, we can play the basic version with some sense of groove. Now let's start talking about adding what I consider to be the most important right hand technique for starting to get an authentic kind of bass playing flavor. Any style of bass playing features plenty of this technique, and it's not something that we encounter in our classical playing very often, and it's called raking. So a lot of the time, classical schools of cello playing have different techniques for basic pizzicato, but a lot of the time to get the string ringing, maybe we're playing with our thumb, maybe we're playing with our index or our middle finger, we lift our hand off the string, and that's a beautiful, graceful gesture, and it can give us a bit of extra ring, maybe the idea is, but that is extremely inefficient. And in the bass playing world, they have a very different concept of moving around, and that really facilitates this raking thing. For those of you that didn't get the Etude book, let's break down exactly how to rake. So the first thing we're going to do is start with our right hand on the G string. And I want you to put your fingers completely onto the fingerboard so that they're actually touching the wood of the fingerboard, okay, right next to the G string. And this is going to be a good way for us to practice not lifting at all, okay, and kind of getting out of that classical pizzicato technique world. And then as you pull back the string, you're going to leave your fingers touching the fingerboard and simply continue the motion. So the string releases, And now I'm in playing position for the C string. Notice I kept my fingers completely touching the fingerboard, letting the G go, and now I'm in playing position on the C string. Almost like a string change, but with pizzicato, making it as smooth as possible. You could also think of this as a slur for the right hand. And now let's apply some raking to our bass line. One great thing about a bass line like this is that it has a lot of open spaces or holes that we can insert some ornaments or extra note fills into. And just to stay focused, I'm going to choose just one of these holes at random. Let's try the one in between the second and third note of the pattern. So that would be between, in the first bar, the G and the E. So we're going to start with adding one simple raked note, resolving to the third note of the pattern. And because I don't want to complicate myself with thinking about other notes of the keys or chord as they change, I'm going to make the raked note muted, okay? Which means I'm just going to use light left-hand pressure so that the note doesn't even sound. We're just focusing on the right hand right now. The subdivision feel is already going to be really helpful that you hear in the cymbal. They're giving us the eighth notes, okay? Here we go. Next bar. Notice I've got to jump above the string that I'm resolving to, right? Let's repeat that again from the top. Almost thinking of as a type of ornament. Resolving to the third note of the bass line. Are you dancing? Are you moving to the groove? Nice. Nice. Adding that extra note above for the rake can take a little bit of practice, right? Even coming from the basic bass line, because we have to jump with our right hand one string above where we were before and then quickly resolve and land back to the goal note string. So if we're trying to get to that E, right, which is on the G string, we have to jump above to the D string really quickly and then rake through it to get to the E. Takes a little bit of practice at first, but once we get the timing and the feel, we're going to be in great shape. Okay, moving on for now. Let's now try to add a double rake, okay? Working backwards, adding an extra eighth note before, again, as an ornament, feeling like we're moving forward and just resolving to the main note. We're going to add a double rake. So we're not just going to go from one string above, we're going to go from two strings above. Okay, let's do the first bar really slowly together without any rhythm, just to demonstrate. So jump two strings above the E where we're going. One more time together, and okay. Now, let's try that in the groove. Again, I'm at about 160 here for my little baillon pattern that I'm playing. Let's try it together. And again, every time, starting with the groove, getting into the feel, dancing with it a little bit, however's natural for you. Now let's try it together. Focusing on that release of the string, that's really important. Again. Really good practice for feeling that string release, because each string has a different tension, right, and a different resistance point. And it's just great for getting you into that feeling of this whole raking technique, right? Sometimes you may feel you kind of want to jump off the string, or you might push through the A string too quickly, right? Because it has a lot less resistance than the lower strings. So it's just awesome, awesome practice, just building your overall feel and sensitivity to the string with your right hand as you pluck. Okay, pays dividends all over the place. We can also get that same sound with a lot less motion by doing a single rake on the string above and adding a muted note by releasing the pressure of our third finger, in this case, before playing it. Rake, mute, pluck. Let's try that together. Getting our body in the groove first. A 1, 2, ready, and. Keep hearing those subdivisions. Again. Good. As you play, especially on the C string, make sure to not use too much of a motion there. Sometimes we can waste a lot of motion in the backswing here. Make that as small as possible so you're moving as little as possible. You're going to have to go to those upper strings pretty soon, so you don't want to do this, right? That's way too much moving. And smaller the motions, the better. Doesn't take a lot of energy to pluck the strings. So don't use more than you need. Okay, so while that technique is a lot easier than the double rake, still make sure to practice the double rake, because there's all kinds of speed situations where it's great to have that going. And again, it's just awesome for increasing your sensitivity and having real mastery of that raking technique, that tool, that concept in your tool belt, right? If you can do double rakes with great groove, single rakes feel a lot easier, right? Okay, now let's move on to what I consider the most important left hand trick bag that we need to get that authentic bass player feel. And I call it slurs. And we can think of slurs as anything we do with the left hand that creates 2 or even more notes. So this includes hammer-ons, pull-offs, sliding up, and sliding down. To me, all of those are different types of slurring techniques, right? Because I'm only using one stroke in my right hand and getting, again, at least 2 notes, right? Most of these you can get even more than 2 notes, like I can do a double hammer-on, right? Or a double slide, or, right? But this is just kind of a general way of organizing and categorizing them so that we can practice them in an efficient manner. And today, so that we don't give ourselves too much material to practice and overwhelm ourselves, we're just going to focus on hammer-ons. And one of the reasons for that is because a hammer-on can be done almost as a percussion technique without playing any notes. And as I said, I kind of want to avoid where we can adding extra notes, because then we're thinking about, keys and different chord changes and which note fits in those. And I just want to focus on just getting these techniques in my fingers with a good sense of feel and groove, right? So eliminating that variable when we can is a good thing, and hammer-ons are a great place to start for that reason. So let's practice this together really quick at a time. We're gonna go, right? No pitch, it's just kind of a slap for now. A little harder to do with our weaker fingers. With our fourth finger by itself, it's especially tricky. So I'm going to make it pretty weak for now. It's kind of good practice in strengthening the finger, right? You could also do a different fingering if you wanted to avoid that, and just make your first finger the root note every time. Right? But I actually like sticking with the original fingering, because when we're actually improvising and in the heat of the moment, we never know what finger we're going to need. So getting your fourth finger ready to at least get some amount of sound with this and strengthening it is really a good thing. It's like learning your trills from each finger. You don't want to just master it from your strong fingers. You want to be able to have some type of fourth finger trill, because that just improves all of your overall facility and makes certain passages a lot easier down the line. So for now, we're going to keep that the original fingering. Now let's try this with our pattern. And even though I'm going through these things relatively quickly for the purpose of this video, this isn't the type of thing, when you first get used to this, that you want to go through each example and just speed through, right? Ideally, you would want to speed up slowly and carefully each technique before adding on top of it, the way we're doing together. Okay, like any other type of practice, it's better to get something really solid and good before moving on. I have to keep emphasizing that even with myself when I'm practicing. So easy to go on before something is really mastered. So let's try that together. Here we go. 1, 2, getting in the groove, and. Do that again, and. So that is the basic version of this routine. And if you only have, say, 5 minutes a day to work on this type of stuff, choose a bass line you're working on, find one gap, right, where there's some space to put in some fills and extra notes, and just work on this. And I promise you, even if you go back to your band and you choose not to use any of these techniques, by practicing these subdivisions and getting the sound and feel of them in your body, it's going to give you a much better, stronger, more consistent sense of time in your playing. No matter what style of music you play, and whether you're playing with the bow or the fingers, to me, most of the rhythmic mistakes and issues in time and feel happen during the long notes, right? You're playing Haydn concerto and you hold a long note for a minute, and then when you come back in, your feel with the faster notes isn't good because you weren't feeling those subdivisions while holding the long note, right? Most of the mistakes that you hear in auditions in classical music are people who aren't holding rests long enough, or respecting the lengths of rests, or getting off long notes too soon because they're nervous. For those of you who want to go a bit further, I want to show you how you can take the basic ideas and ingredients we just talked about and create even more complicated, even more ornate fills and grooves.